it launched an investigation into NVIDIA. NVIDIA's chips have helped in fueling the AI revolution. China claims the company violated its monopoly rules. The ban and the investigations are not random. They follow a clear pattern. Experts believe these are calculated steps by Beijing. China is weaponizing export controls. Their goal? To use them as bargaining chips. Its economy is struggling to recover. Beijing relies heavily on exports to drive growth. And exports are what make China an economic powerhouse. But that growth engine is just not firing anymore. Growth in exports has been sluggish. In November, China's exports grew by just 6.7%. This is a sharp drop from October, when China's exports increased by nearly 30%.
और अगर आप एक बार खेलना चाहते हैं तो भाई फ्री में खेल सकते हैं। 100 रुपये साल में बोनस मिलेगा, उससे खेल लो। जो भी विन करोगे आप आ जाएंगे।
Vintage.
Hello and welcome to Vantage. Our focus remains on the regime change in Syria. The rebels are slowly consolidating power, but waves of retribution grip the country. Symbols and loyalists of Bashar al-Assad are being targeted. Even his ally Russia is on the run. Satellite images show Russian ships leaving their Syrian naval base. Is Moscow pulling out of the country? If so, what does it mean for Putin's ambitions in West Asia? And he's not alone. Leaders in Europe, Turkey, Israel, the US are all scrambling to secure their interests in Syria. We'll tell you what each side is up to. Also, why is Donald Trump inviting Xi Jinping to his inauguration? Why are American CEOs recruiting bodyguards? Why is FIFA being panned after awarding the 2034 World Cup to Saudi Arabia? Why Elon Musk continues to gather wealth despite his setbacks at X? Why India's wages are stagnant despite booming profits for companies? And what it says about India's inequality problem. Also, how did Erdogan crack a deal between Ethiopia and Somalia? It seems like the Turkish president is everywhere. And if you want inspiration, we've got the perfect story for you tonight. An 88-year-old who rediscovered his love for the piano. Bill, it is likely to be tabled in the winter session of Parliament. The bill allows simultaneously holding Lok Sabha polls and state assembly elections. One Nation, One Election initiative is high on the agenda of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government. South Korean opposition parties submit a new motion to impeach the president. The 6 parties say they will put the motion to a floor vote on Saturday. Their earlier attempt to impeach the president had failed last week. President Yoon Suk-yeol is under fire for declaring martial law on the 3rd of December. US President Joe Biden commutes the sentences of around 1,500 people and pardons 39 Americans convicted of non-violent crimes. It's the largest single-day act of clemency in modern US history. Biden could also issue preemptive pardons for those who investigated Donald Trump. Romania and Bulgaria will become full-time members of the Schengen area from next year. This would complete the process that started in 2011. Austria had initially opposed this move, but last month, Vienna lifted its veto. Romania and Bulgaria have been members of the European Union since 2007. And India's D. Gukesh wins the World Chess Championship. He beat China's Ding Liren in a 14-round match in Singapore. At 18 years of age, Gukesh is the youngest chess champion. He's also India's second after Vishwanathan Anand. Days after the fall of Assad, Syria remains in turmoil. The rebels are trying to seize power and establish control in Damascus. In the rest of the country, chaos reigns. Take a look at these pictures from Al-Qardaha. It's a town in northeastern Syria.
هو حافظ أسد الله يحرق بقبره. حارقينه الشباب حرقوه عملوه قاموا بالواجب عم دفوه.
I'm an AI tools and ChatGPT expert.
Okay, so what degree did you do to master this?
I didn't need any fancy degrees or spend lakhs of rupees on expensive courses to learn this skill.
So then how did you master these AI tools and get such a high salary?
I started by attending B10X's certified AI tools and ChatGPT workshop. In just 3 hours, I was equipped with all the required knowledge that I needed to enter this field.
Okay, and
After the workshop, which was just for rupees 9 by the way, I started getting a call from a lot of recruiters.
عم دفوه.
That's the tomb of Hafiz al-Assad, the former ruler of Syria and the father of the ousted President Bashar al-Assad. The one who has taken refuge in Syria, Bashar al-Assad. So this is what happened in Al-Qardaha. Unidentified men set the tomb of Hafiz al-Assad on fire. This shows the public anger against the old regime in Syria. After the president has been ousted, his rule are being. It is clear that the Assad era is over. Syrians want to a future without this regime. They are calling for retribution. A new challenger will emerge. Meanwhile, those who partnered with Assad want to cut their losses, like Russia, which backed the. Moscow now says it is trying to engage with the opposition groups.
You know that we situation in Syria. This is necessary. Situation in Syria. This is necessary because our bases are located there.
This port, remember, Russian ships were still there. They aren't. Reports say Russian ships left this port last week. It is not if this is a temporary move or if Russia has left Tartus for good. But if Moscow, Syria's new leaders and discuss the future of their carefully, because this isn't just a Russia's military footprint in Syria is much wider than this. It includes around 7 retribution, weary of the process of rebuilding a country in ruins. The US has sent the HTS asking them to establish an inclusive and transitional government. Syria's opposition parties have their own vision of what their future should look like. Again, there is no consensus. Each power has a different priority in Syria. Some want to demilitarize it, some want to democratize it, and others are scared of an ISIS resurgence. So tonight we're looking at the scramble for Syria. What are regional and world powers doing there? Let's start with Turkey. They're hosting more than 3 million Syrian refugees. A lot of them have amassed at the border. Experts say at least half of them will return to Syria. And most families have the same plan. Send the young men first, see how the situation is, and then the whole family can follow. Local governments in Turkey have also jumped in. Some mayors are offering one-way tickets to refugees. That's transport plus relocation costs. So Ankara's first objective is to get the refugees back home. But they also have a military objective, to weaken Kurdish groups. You see, Turkey is home to a restive Kurdish minority. President Erdogan calls them terrorists. Syria also has Kurdish groups, and they're backed by the United States. Erdogan is using this transition period to weaken the Kurds. He's launched multiple strikes on Kurdish targets. Another country is using the same strategy, and that is Israel. Instead of the Kurds, Israel is destroying assets of the ousted Assad regime. All sorts of military sites have been hit by the Israelis. Prime Minister Netanyahu has also reached out to the rebels. He says he is willing to engage on one condition, that the rebels do not help Iran. And rounding up the region are Arab countries. Most of them are in a pickle. They have welcomed the change in regime. They've also demanded the protection of Syria's sovereignty and territory. But deep inside, the Arabs will be worried. The Syrian rebellion grew out of the Arab Spring, out of Islamic political movements. The Gulf monarchies do not like that. They see such movements as a threat to their power. For example, the UAE is apparently livid. They were caught off guard by the rebel offensive.
Reaching Tura from
You
Chalkpot.
see, the US once considered the new rebel leaders to be terrorists. I'm talking about the HTS. The Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the Americans call them terrorists, but now Washington is reaching out to them. which is why the Gulf Arab states are nervous. Thousands of ISIS fighters are in prisons, the US prisons. The US will want to keep them there. Washington also has a base in southern Syria. It houses around 900 soldiers. The US will be keen to retain that influence. But to do that, they will need the Kurds. If the Kurds have a say in the future government in Damascus, the US can retain its foothold. If not, Washington may face pushbacks. Look at the situation in Iraq. The US has more than 2,000 soldiers there in Iraq. But the Iraq government does not like it. They have been trying to expel the American soldiers. Then we have the Europeans. Honestly, it's not a good time for Europe. Brussels is more focused on the war in Ukraine. They're bracing for the Donald Trump effect. So West Asia is not high on their priority list. Nonetheless, we've seen some moves. Germany is hosting around 1 million Syrian refugees, but Berlin is not rushing to send them back. Their foreign minister wants to coordinate with the United Nations to see if things are stable in Syria. She has also announced more aid for the country, around $8.4 million.
Viele von denjenigen, die in den letzten Jahren Schutz gesucht.
The situation is so unclear that it's currently impossible to judge whether there will be another flow of refugees from that region or whether a return to Syria is actually possible. In order to ensure further assistance for the people in spite of the difficult security situation, we will provide an additional 8 million euros in humanitarian aid.
Now, most of Europe is facing the same question. They're hosting tens of thousands of Syrian refugees. Should they be sent back or not? That is the question. Some European politicians are very eager to do this. They say charter planes and return them to Syria. We haven't seen European governments doing that yet, but they have paused asylum requests. Even this year, more than 100,000 Syrians applied for asylum. Those applications were paused after Assad's ouster. So Europe's policy is to wait and watch. And finally, you have China. They did not militarily support Assad, like Russia or Iran, but diplomatically they did. Last year, China hosted Assad during the Asian Games. They also increased financial assistance. China pumped around $3 billion into Syria's oil and gas industry. Assad also signed up for the Belt and Road Initiative back in 2022. So Beijing's plan was to cash in on Syria's reconstruction. They bet on Assad to prevail in this war. And after his ouster, they haven't said much. China's foreign ministry called for stability and peace. They also demanded a political process. Like I said, each player has their own interest in Syria. And they're not sitting idly. They are using...
रमी खेलो तो जंगली रमी
रमी नहीं खेलता है रे
रमी से
ये थोड़ा स्मार्ट कर
जंगली रमी पे है आपकी सेफ्टी
स्किप करता हो
using force to secure those interests. If they're not careful, the results could be disastrous. The US versus China, Donald Trump versus Xi Jinping. A battle is on the horizon, a fight for trade dominance. You know about the opening moves. We've told you about how Trump is planning to impose tariffs on Chinese goods. They may start at 10% and go as high as 60%, maybe even higher if Donald Trump deems it necessary. Xi Jinping has been planning his defense strategy. Yesterday we talked about China stopping mineral exports, how Beijing plans to weaponize export controls and use this as a bargaining chip. Now, with all of this talk of trade war, a new report has come out, one that seemingly goes against this narrative. Donald Trump has apparently invited Xi Jinping to his inauguration. Trump will be sworn in on the 20th of January. There are about 40 days to go, and he seems to want Xi Jinping as a guest for this event. Xi in early November. They spoke shortly after Trump won the election, and it seems that is when Xi Jinping was invited. Now, this is quite unusual for a number of reasons. Traditionally, a US presidential inauguration is a domestic affair. Americans gather to watch their new leader being sworn in. You have the supporters, you have government officials, and living former presidents in attendance. You don't see foreign leaders in such inaugurations. At most, you'll have the ambassadors of foreign nations in the crowd. That's it. That is the tradition, and it has been this way since 1874. That's as far back as the records go. 150 years. But it seems Donald Trump plans to break this tradition. And don't get me wrong, Trump doesn't seem to be doing this exclusively for Xi Jinping. It seems Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has been invited as well. Reports say that Orbán is considering flying down. And don't be surprised if that happens. Trump and Orbán share close ties. Orbán was in the US to meet Trump just this week. So he could easily fly over again in January. A lot of other leaders could. But these are mostly Trump's friends. Xi Jinping is a different case altogether. Trump and Xi look set to begin a harrowing trade war, a conflict that could reshape global supply lines. It was a major pitch during Donald Trump's presidential campaign, and we know that Xi Jinping is taking it seriously. So then why is Trump calling him? Perhaps it's the old adage, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Or it could just be an act of courtesy, like opposing teams shaking hands. It doesn't mean the trade war has been called off. And whether Xi accepts this invite is another matter altogether. Xi Jinping has been invited to inaugurations in the past. He's always declined to go personally. Instead, he sends special envoys. And that makes it even more unlikely in this case. Also, there are just 40 days left. It takes time to organize a Chinese presidential trip to the US. There is protocol. Security arrangements need to be made. It's not something that can happen off the cuff. So it is highly unlikely that Xi Jinping will attend Donald Trump's inauguration. And that also highlights another point. Like we said, Trump may have invited him back in November. And we've seen the developments since then. Nothing has changed. The dynamics have not changed. Both sides have made statements about tariffs since then. China continues to try and build its defense. So clearly, the inauguration invite won't stop the impending trade war. Now let's shift our attention to Afghanistan. The Islamic State has struck a major blow to the Taliban. They took out Khalil Haqqani. He was a refugee minister of the Taliban. Khalil Haqqani was targeted by a suicide bomber just as he was about to leave his office. And this man was a key figure in the Taliban government. He was the uncle of Sirajuddin Haqqani, the interior minister of Kabul. The Taliban took power in Kabul in 2021, and since then they have waged a war against ISIS-K, the Islamic State Khorasan. ISIS-K, it is the local branch of the Islamic State, and this attack was a message to the Taliban. It shows how the ISIS still remains a serious threat to their rule in Afghanistan.
It was a daring and brutal strike. As Khalil Haqqani was leaving his office, the suicide bomber struck. The blast killed 7 people, including Haqqani himself. This attack strikes at the core of the Taliban's government, and it came from a long-standing enemy, the Islamic State Khorasan. Since 2021, when the Taliban returned to power, ISIS-K has been challenging their rule. Suicide bombings have been their go-to tool. Yesterday's attack may be the Taliban's biggest setback yet. Khalil Haqqani was part of the Haqqani network. It's a powerful faction of the Taliban. He was also designated a global terrorist by the United States. But to his peers, Haqqani was more than just a leader. He was an elder statesman and a war hero, one who was working to rehabilitate refugees returning to Afghanistan from countries like Pakistan and Iran. He was also the uncle of Sirajuddin Haqqani, the Taliban's acting interior minister.
The days of manual stock trading are gone. In the next 5 years, AI will make 90% of trades automatically. Do you want to be ahead of everyone and switch to AI-powered trading right now? Or will you keep making those average returns? The choice is yours. But if you want 30% plus...
The strike is a blow for Afghanistan's new rulers. It couldn't have come at a worse time. There are whispers of internal strife within the Taliban. These tensions stem from some recent decisions. The Taliban's supreme leader, Habibatullah Akhundzada, has made deeply unpopular moves. Recently, he banned women from attending medical colleges, including nursing schools. Leaders like Sirajuddin Haqqani have opposed such restrictions. The interior minister has pushed for a more pragmatic approach. He has argued for allowing girls to attend school beyond the 6th grade. He has also advocated for women to return to work in government offices. His uncle's death will further inflame these internal tensions. Since 2021, they have strengthened their grip on power, but groups like the ISIS-K have still managed to mount fresh attacks. Every year, Afghanistan witnesses dozens of bombings and suicide attacks. ISIS-K has been behind. They constantly target Taliban officials. The ISIS-K their rule. That's why Haqqani is a major victory. The attack yesterday it challenges the growing difficulties in maintaining their leadership. While ISIS-K poses the greatest danger, other threats also persist. The National Resistance Front is one such rival. This anti-Taliban faction includes former members of Afghanistan's deposed government. As of today, the Taliban is still stronger and has more resources, but they're starting to look vulnerable.
It was a quiet Wednesday morning in New York. Brian Thompson was on his way to a conference. He was the CEO of United Healthcare. It was just another day for him. It turned out to be his last. He was gunned down outside a Manhattan hotel. The suspect is a 26-year-old man named Luigi Mangione. Bullet casings left at the scene bore cryptic messages: deny, defend, depose. That's what they said. Deny, defend, depose. The symbolism was as chilling as the act itself. We told you about the suspect yesterday, how he's become a bit of a hero, inspiring merchandise on Amazon. And while killing someone cannot be the solution, this case also shows the widespread anger against the healthcare industry in the US. And this realization has triggered widespread panic. Corporate America is nervous. CEOs are on high alert. Healthcare may be the target now. But others worry if they would be next.
There may be some liability back on his company. The fact that they knew he was getting threats, was it known to them? And did the board not then provide security at an event that was known?
Brian Thompson had received threats before, multiple times according to his wife, but he did not have a security detail. He was walking alone to the hotel, and that's because corporate security is often a touchy issue. CEOs make
Yang indala kadang daw do na do sing na ne